Welcome back to the conference, and our next speaker is Antonio Romano. Antonio Romano is a Ph.D. candidate in Roman history at the University of Le Mans and is working on a thesis entitled César sur les Sévères, figure et mémoire de l'Impérateur à la fin du Haut-Empire, under the supervision of Estelle Bertrand. With a degree in Philology, Literature and History of the Ancient World from Sapienza University in Rome, he completed a master's thesis in Roman history and Latin epigraphy under the supervision of Gian Luca Gregori, focusing on the principate of Domitian. Since 2019, he has been collaborating with the EDR, Epigraphic Database Rome, for the online publication of Roman inscriptions. And Antonio's presentation today is entitled Caesar's Memory at the Beginning of the Third Century. And I hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. I will start with a captatio benevolentiae by saying that my English is bad in a certain sense, because it's quite difficult to speak three languages. So I'm Italian, and then I work in France. So my French actually is very good, but now since I'm in France, I lost all my abilities in English. So sorry for this. So today I would like to present my doctoral research. But before doing this, I would like to give you some technical information about my work. As you said, after a master's degree in classical philology and Roman history at the Sapienza Università di Roma, I started this PhD project in Le Mans with a thesis about the memory of Caesar in the 3rd century. This project actually was not conceived by myself, but by thesis director, Estelle Bertrand, because of her interest in Cassius Dio. In fact, she has published several books of Cassius Dio in the Belles Lettres. So the first aim of this thesis is rightly to understand the place of Julius Caesar in Cassius Dio, Roman history. But actually, I really want to find out what Roman people knew about Julius Caesar at the beginning of the 3rd century and how the dynasty, so how the Severan dynasty, used the memory of Julius Caesar. So these are the objectives of my thesis and the titles, supervisors, and the other supervisors. So I think that in order to answer to these questions, I have to start with by saying some words about the memory studies, because I think that my thesis is a part of the long durée of the memory studies. Memory studies have begun in 20th century thanks to the activity of Maurice Holbach, who was a French sociologist who died in Buchenwald. Maurice Holbach was the first to talk about the mémoire collective, so the collective memory. In fact, he has shown that every memory, even the most personal one, is inscribed in the social structure. But the problem of the relationship between memory and history was analyzed particularly after the Second World War. In particular, the publication of Le Lieu de Mémoire by Pierre Nora and his equipe started a sort of memory boom. I mean, a great part of the historians started to study the place of memory in society. And this memory boom did not spare ancient historians. I think that French and US have perhaps produced the best work in that sense, so about the place of memory in ancient society. But I will mention a German work by Jan Assmann, Das kulturelle Gedächtnis, the cultural memory, where he gave a definition of cultural memory by distinguishing it by the communicative memory. So if cultural memory concerns mythical past and the ancient history, the communicative memory concerns a very recent past, the space of 100 years. If the cultural memory is established, formalized, and is inscribed in ceremonies, the communicative memory is more fluid. So this distinction is very important in the studies of memory in the ancient society. But I think that it is not very useful for my aim. So for the understanding of the place of Caesar at the beginning of the 3rd century. To do this, I will quote another book by Jan Asman was about Moses, so Moses der Egypte, where he gave the definition of the mnemonic history. And I think that my thesis is ascribed in the context of the theory of mnemonic history. So here it is a definition of mnemonic history. I like history proper. Mnemonic history is concerned with the past as such, but only with the past as remember it. Mnemonic history is a reception theory applied to history, but reception is not be understood merely in a narrow sense of transmitting and receiving. The past is not simply received by the present is altered by the past, and the past is modeled, invented, reinvented, and reconstructed by the present. The aim of an historical study is not to ascertain the possible truth of tradition, such as the tradition about Moses, but to study this tradition as a phenomenon of collective memory. Memories may be false, distorted, invented, or implanted. In fact, I will argue that there is a great difference between the historical figure of Julius Caesar, so the man who was killed in Rome in 444 BC, and the memory that Romans had about Julius Caesar. In my thesis, I will not study the historical figure of Julius Caesar, because clearly there is enormous bibliography about Julius Caesar, but I will study only his memory. So his memory, which was, as I say, very, very different from the historical figure, which is the bibliography about the memory of Julius Caesar. I will quote some books and the problems of these books, even if I think they are very great works. So the first book I will mention is A Companion to Julius Caesar, which was published by Miriam Griffin in 2008 or 9. And if you search something about Julius Caesar memory, you will find only papers about the Julius Caesar plays in Latin or Greek literature. I mean, when we search something about his memory, the great part of ancient scholars have studied only the place of Caesar in literature. For example, you can see these papers, which are very great papers, for Augustan Tiberian literature, Lagnerian literature, Seneca and Lucan, etc., etc. So the great part of these papers about Caesar posterity concerns only literary aspects, even if there are some papers which concern the historical memory of Julius Caesar. For example, this paper by Barbara Levick, Caesar, Political and Military Legacy to the Roman Emperors, and this very great paper by Timothy Barnes, The First Emperor, The View of Late Antiquity. So I will say that I will follow the example of Barbara Levick and Timothy Barnes. This book, which was published in 2021, is a great book, but I think that it presents the same problems of A Companion to Julius Caesar. In fact, the posterity of Julius Caesar is studied only for its literary aspect, as you can see this by the title of this paper, which I have mentioned. But again, there is a great paper by Giuseppe Zecchini about Julius Caesar in Western late antiquity. So in my thesis, I don't want to understand the place of Caesar in the ancient literature, because as I showed to you, there is already a great bibliography about this, but only the place of Julius Caesar, of the historical memory of Julius Caesar. And this problem, I think, has been studied only for the first part of the empire, and particularly the empire of Augustus, and as you have seen in the for the late antiquity. So I think that if we want to understand the place of Caesar memory in the empire, we have to start by analyzing the reason why it was defied after his death. And the ancient sources are very clear about this problem. In fact, we can see that his cult was a military and a popular cult. As you can read in this passage of Cassius Dio, the Julius Caesar was defied because of the will of Roman people. As you can read, oi polloi, so Roman people interpret in a very specific way the apparition of the star, and to the Roman people, this was the symbol of the deification of Julius Caesar. So at the beginning, it was a sort of popular cult, but then it was embraced by Augustus and by the other politicians. but at the beginning it was a popular cult. The second aspect I think that is very important of the cult of Julius Caesar to understand is the long path in the empire, during the empire, is the fact that it was a military cult. In Diodorus Siculus, we have the reason why it was defined. We have the formula of his deification, or dietas praxis, eponomasteis theos, so rerum gestare causa in Latin. It was defined because of his military actions. And I will argue that this military memory of Julius Caesar lasted until the end of the empire. Caesar was always remembered as a great conqueror, and he was, in a certain sense, always a model as a military commander. But from a political point of view, Julius Caesar was a very problematic figure. In my thesis, I will study the place of Julius Caesar memory in the first 2 centuries of the empire, so before the Severians, in order to find out what kind of interpretation could have influenced the Severian view of Julius Caesar. In fact, following Gadamer hermeneutics, I'm absolutely convicted of the fact that when we interpret something, even in a conscious manner, we are influenced by previous interpretation. So I really want to find out what kind of interpretation could have influenced the Severian vision. And the first filter, I think, is the filter of Augustus. As you know, Augustus justified, the very young Augustus Octavian justified his position by the fact that he was the son of Julius Caesar, and he was the son of a god. But from a political point of view, there is a great difference between Augustus and Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a dictator, while Augustus refused several times dictatorship. Julius Caesar destroyed Roman Senate with his war against Pompey, while Augustus tried to always find a compromise with Augustus. In a certain sense, the vision of Julius Caesar was really different from the political vision of Augustus, who would try to restore the Republic, a new form of Republic, obviously. This political difference between Augustus and Caesar was clearly explained by Ronald Syme in his Roman Revolution. So now I will read this passage from Ronald Syme. So Caesar that became a god and a myth, passing from the realm of history to literature and legend, declamation, propaganda. By Augustus, he was exploited in 2 ways. The advantage of Caesar fell to his adopted son, who assumed the title of Divi Filius as a consecration for the rule of Rome. That was all he affected to inherit from Caesar, the alo. The god was useful, but not the dictator. Augustus was careful sharply to discriminate between dictator and princeps. Under his rule, Caesar the dictator was either suppressed outright or called up from time to time to enhance the contrast between the scrupulous adventurer who destroyed the pre-state his ambition and the modest magistrate who restored the republic. I think that I can go further than Ronald Syme by saying that Augustus promoted a sort of dehistoricization of Julius Caesar figure. As Syme said, the only thing that Augustus was interested to inherit from Caesar was the alo. And this, I think, this fact led to a sort of dehistorization of Julius Caesar figure. Julius Caesar became a god, and only a god, so it was not mentioned as a political, it was not a political model to the first Roman emperors. And so I will argue that for the 1st century, because of this action by Augustus, there was a sort of embarrassment about Julius Caesar memory, Julius Caesar political memory. So you can see that this is an interpretation of Julius Caesar, but it's a possibility. I mean, there were also at Augustus' time other interpretation about Julius Caesar figure and other kind of utilization of Julius Caesar figure. For example, Augustus' enemies, such as Mark Antony and the others after the Battle of Actium, try to explore a new and present a new vision of Julius Caesar, and so try to explain a new memory of Julius Caesar. For them, Julius Caesar was a political model because he had a more autocratic view of the power more than Augustus, because in a certain sense, they saw Julius Caesar as the model for an autocratic power, for a monarchic rule, that's in the Hellenistic way. Julius Caesar was a greater model than Augustus because he had a more aggressive policy, for example, in Britain and Orient, and we know that Augustus was very different from Julius Caesar for this problem. And they appreciated Julius Caesar as a model because of his relationship with Roman Senate soldiers. So as you can see, in Augustus' time, there were two visions of Julius Caesar. And clearly, because of the victory of Augustus over Mark Antony, and because of the stability of Augustus' empire, the vision of Augustus of Julius Caesar was the official vision. But this was only a possibility. And it is quite interesting to say that these two visions of Julius Caesar, so Augustus' vision and Augustus' enemies' vision of Julius Caesar, these two visions did not represent what Julius Caesar was and what he did. For example, this vision of Augustus' enemy as a Julius Caesar as a monarchic rule in the Hellenistic way, in a certain sense, is interesting, but it does not represent what Julius Caesar was, because Julius Caesar, to me, in my opinion, refused the Hellenistic model of power. Anyway, in the first century, as I said, there was a sort of embarrassment about Julius Caesar figure and Julius Caesar memory. So from time to time, it was called up because of military actions. For example, Julius Caesar was a model to the Emperor Claudius because of his invasion of Britain. But from a political point of view, the dictatorship of Julius Caesar was not a model. And the only model for the Roman emperors, in such a sense, was Augustus. And as I said, Augustus refused Caesar model. This situation, I think, so in the first century, there was another reason why Julius Caesar was called up. And I think for the civil war, at the end of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, after the death of Nero, there was a very famous civil war, the Longus et Unus Annus. And in this Longus et Unus Annus, some people tried to restore this coin of Brutus, where Brutus celebrated the death of Julius Caesar, and they reused the images of Brutus to celebrate the libertas restituta, so the restitution of freedom, and here you have a representation of freedom. So it means that the return of the Civil War, the first Civil War after the end of the Republic, in a certain sense was an occasion to talk about Julius Caesar and to talk about his memory, but in a certain sense in a very negative view. From these points, I think that we can say that Julius Caesar was not appreciated by as a political model because he's linked to dictatorship and in a certain sense to kingship. This situation lasted until, I think, the end of the first century. With the end of the republicanism, according to Syme, in 98, so under the reign of Trajan, we have a sort of revelation of Julius Caesar model and memory. I think that to Trajan, Julius Caesar was a great model. In fact, Trajan restored his program to the conquest of the East, the conquest of Dacia, and his project of the war against the Parth. Trajan, for example, restored some of the coins of Julius Caesar. As you can see, we have some coins of Julius Caesar, which were restored by the Emperor Trajan. For example, Trajan restored the temple of Venus Genetrix in the Caesar Forum the same day of the publication of the Trajan column. So I think that there is a great link between Trajan and Julius Caesar. And to Trajan, in a certain sense, Caesar was not only a military model as for Claudius, but it was rightly a political model. And this was found out by Syme again. So Tacitus mentions Julius Caesar very frequently and never with dispraise or malice, banishing by the artifice of convection the dictatorial language against his place in the life of Caesar. The phenomenon is noteworthy time, the pattern effect of the monarchical rule and the obsolescence of republican affectation all contribute. The epoch of Trajan felt the attraction of Caesar was also a conqueror. So we can say that by the time of Trajan, Caesar could be, in a certain sense, a positive figure. In fact, starting a positive figure. And this is very important for the place of Caesar under the Severan dynasty, because I think that the image of Caesar that the Severans had was the image created by Trajan. So I think that Trajan was the most important filter for the Severans. But as I said, the aim of this thesis is rightly to understand what Roman people may know about Julius Caesar at the beginning of the 3rd century. And so it's likely to find out which was the place of Julius Caesar in Roman collective memory. And I think that in order to answer to these questions, in order to find his place in Roman collective memory, we can use a type of kind of sources. So the rhetoric sources. In fact, I think that if we understand the place of Caesar in Roman history handbooks, we can find out what the young Romans had to know about Julius Caesar. So the very basic information about Julius Caesar. And for this reason, I will use some books such as the Liber Memorialis of Lucius Ampelius. Lucius Ampelius wrote this Liber Memorialis, this aide mémoire, which is an handbook where you can find what a young Roman had to know about geography and astrology and history. This book was written according to the French editor at the end of the reign of Marcus Aurelius, but according to other scholars in the 3rd century. However, I think that the Liber Memorialis of Lucius Ampelius could represent what a young Roman had to know about Julius Caesar in Severian period. And it is it's quite interesting that sometimes the image that they had of Julius Caesar is a mistake. For example, in the first pages that you can read, Julius Caesar is mentioned because of his conquest of the Gallia. It's true, his conquest of Germania and Britannia. And as modern scholars, we know that Caesar did not conquest Germania and Britannia. They were campaigning Germany and Britain, but Caesar could not be credited for the conquest of Germania and Britannia, the same level of the conquest of the Gallia. In the second passage, you can read a discussion about the place of Caesar, the dictatorship of Caesar, and the relationship of this dictatorship and the empire. According to Lucius Ampelius, the Caesar had a sort of dictatura perpetua, and this dictatura perpetua lasted also under Augustus and the other emperors. But we know from Quintilian that students had to discuss about Julius Caesar, so they did declamaciones about Julius Caesar. For example, in this passage I have mentioned, you have a declamatio where students had to discuss about the possibility of Caesar to gain the monarchic rule or not. So I think that it is quite interesting to understand the place of Caesar in the rhetorical sources and in such books such as the Liber Memorialis of Lucius Ampelius, because in that way I think that we will have what they had to know about Julius Caesar, so what a normal man will know about this figure. I think that another great problem about the memory of Julius Caesar is the place of his cult. So we know that after his death, Julius Caesar was deified, but did the cult of Julius Caesar still exist at the beginning of the 3rd century? This question is not a simple question because in some calendars, in some testimonies, we cannot find the mentions of Julius Caesar dies natalis. So in a certain sense, Julius Caesar's birthday was not celebrated, for example, in the iconography of the first century. Julius Caesar is never mentioned by the Fratres Arbales, so in the commentary of the Fratres Arbales. So in a certain sense, Julius Caesar cult was a very particular cult. And I think that if we understand, if we understand the place of his cult in the third century, we can find out really the place of his place in Roman collective memory, because Roman collective memory is strictly linked to this manifestation, such as the celebration of Dies Natalis, Ludi Victoria, etc., etc. But for example, we have no mentions of Julius Caesar Flaminius in the third century. So in a certain sense, Julius Caesar cult was very particular, and so we don't know if it was celebrated in the Severan period, because, as I said, it is not mentioned in some documents such as the Commentari fra Marvarium. And I think that a very linked question is the place of Caesar as a first emperor. In fact, according to a tradition which started at the beginning of the third century, Julius Caesar is the first Roman emperor. In some chronologies, the empire started with Julius Caesar and not with Augustus. And we have some evidence from the Severan period, for example, Julius Africanus. According to Julius Africanus, Julius Caesar was the first emperor. So I think that this is a very linked question to the place of Caesar as a divus, so place of Caesar cult. Anyway, in my thesis, I want also to find out the place of Caesar in the political discussion of the Severan time. And I think that in a certain sense, Caesar was remembered because of his connection with civil war. At the end of the second century, there was a great civil war after the death of Pertinax. And Septimius Severus won this civil war. And after his victory over Claudius Albinus in 197, he returned to Rome and he delivered a speech where he refused, as you can read in this passage from Cassius Dio, the clemency of Julius Caesar, which was a very normal model to Roman emperors. But this passage is quite interesting because it is a proof of the fact that they discuss about Julius Caesar during the civil war. And it is interesting that Septimius Severus, in order to justify the death of some senators, 40 senators according to the Historia Augusta, refused the model of Julius Caesar clemency. And this model, in a certain sense, was followed by his enemy, Claudius Albinus, as you can see in this coin. So it is quite interesting to see that the return of the civil war, in a certain sense, led to a revitalization of Julius Caesar memory at the end of the second century. So the first link between Julius Caesar memory and Severan dynasty is slightly the civil war, the return of the civil war. And I think that Septimius Severus mentioned Julius Caesar in his autobiography. He mentioned the clemency of Julius Caesar as a negative model in order to justify his actions against the Senate. A second link between Julius Caesar and the Severian dynasty, I think, is Roman Britain. As we have read in Lucius Ampelius, Julius Caesar is linked to Britain. So when Septimius Severus and Caracalla did their campaign in Britain, in a certain sense, they remembered Julius Caesar. In fact, we have some celebration coins by Caracalla, which in a certain sense reproduce the celebrations of Julius Caesar. For example, if you have a coin of Caracalla, where there is a Venus with victory, which represents the same coins of Julius Caesar. So I think that in order to celebrate their victory in Britain, they reuse Julius Caesar symbols. Another proof of this is the fact that in the Caesar Forum, we have found inscriptions which celebrate the victory of the Severians in Britain. So we know that that in the imperial age, Julius Caesar Forum was used by the Antonine dynasty as an explanation, as a place of exhibition of status, etc., etc. But I think that the Severians, such as Septimius Severus and Caracalla, in a certain sense, used the Caesar Forum as a place to celebrate their victory in Britain, because Caesar was linked to Britain. But a great part of my thesis concerned the place of Julius Caesar in Cassius Dio Roman history. In fact, surprising as it may seem, there is no work about Julius Caesar in Cassius Dio. I mean, you can find some paper, but an overview is lacking. So the aim of this thesis is actually to understand the vision of Caesar in Cassius Dio Roman history. In fact, his analysis of the dictator is in a certain sense innovative and surprising. Take, for instance, this passage from the book 39, where Cassius Dio is discussing about the Julius Caesar campaign, and in Gaul, and particularly in Britain. And in this passage, he said that this action of Julius Caesar in Britain was useful. So he did it because of the glory, but it did not conquer the Britain. So why Dio is so harsh towards Caesar? In my opinion, Dio is so harsh because he criticized Roman imperialism at the beginning of the 3rd century. And so for this reason was influenced in his vision of Julius Caesar, figure. I mean, Dio is so harsh towards Septimius Severus because he thinks that their military actions were useful, and for the same reason he was so harsh towards Caesar. So I think that in Cassius Dio narration about Julius Caesar, we can find some elements of the 3rd century. For example, in this passage, in the second passage, Cassius Dio Cassius Dio is discussing the death of Caesar, and according to him, his death was a crime. But in a certain sense, the vision proposed by Dio of Julius Caesar is very negative. Julius Caesar was, in a certain sense, a very negative model. So he was the model of the bad emperors. Julius Caesar to Dio represents the dangers of the empire, dangers of the monarchic rule. So even if to Dio the monarchic rule was the best one, in a certain sense, his analysis of Julius Caesar is useful because in his descriptions of Julius Caesar, he shows the dangers of the monarchic rule. So even if Julius Caesar is not a positive figure in Cassius Dio Roman history, his death was a crime because Julius Caesar had a very important role in the foundation of the empire. So as you can see, the vision of Julius Caesar proposed by Dio is very ambiguous and very interesting. So my aim is not to make a commentaries of the 7 books dedicated to Julius Caesar by Cassius Dio, but to find out rightly the relationship between the vision proposed by Cassius Dio of Julius Caesar and Julius Caesar memory in the 3rd century. So that's all. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.